Kazakhstan's foreign ministry has recently summoned Chinese ambassador Zhang Xiao to protest an article published on a Chinese website, sohu.com. The article, titled "Why Kazakhstan is Eager to Return to China," has caused a public fury in the country and run counter to the spirit of the strategic partnership declared between the countries. To discuss the Kazakh-Chinese relations, Wade Shepard is joining me today from New York. Wade is a writer, journalist, and documentary filmmaker. He's the author of books like Ghost Cities of China and On the New Silk Road. He spent years traveling along the corridors of the New Silk Road in Eurasia, also known as China's Belt-and-Road Initiative. Good morning, Wade. Thank you for joining.
Thank you very much for having me.
New York City and New York State have been hit hard by the coronavirus. How are you holding up?
Ooh, we're doing okay here, just staying inside a lot, only going outside to like run and jog and get food and stuff like that. But I don't know, it's been a little tough, crammed into a little New York City apartment we're going on over 6 weeks now. We're approaching 2 months of this. So we're starting to get ready to go now, but it seems like we're getting kind of on top of this virus. We know more about it, and it's looking like we're going to be able to open up more and actually start working towards kind of defeating it pretty soon in the future.
Wade, I wanted to talk to you about the recent article on sohu.com. Following the article, you wrote a post about whether Kazakhstan was China's new territorial claim. We know that Chinese Foreign Ministry said in a statement that the views represented in the article don't represent the official position of Beijing. From talking to friends and colleagues in China and also looking at the media reports coming from China, that the ideas also don't seem to represent the popular view in China. What is your take on it?
I would say that there's a small minority in China that are like highly nationalistic, and they're a very vocal minority. They really put in the effort to put their ideals out into the broader public and the broader sphere. So if you just look at Chinese media, you're going to see a lot of stories that are I would say a little bit out there and a little beyond the realm of reality, right? I mean, such as, especially now with the coronavirus pandemic, kind of Chinese confidence has kind of taken a bit of a hit, right? We have China, who is trying to become this global leader in tech, global leader in health, and, just kind of like pave the way into the future. And then you have this virus popping up in their country and spreading all over the world and doing significant damage to the global economy. So pretty much now more than ever, we're seeing like these nationalistic voices kind of like, coming out into the mainstream more and more. And it's kind of something to, first of all, kind of reassure the people of China that China is good and China is great. And especially in the case with the sohu.com article about Kazakhstan, that people want to be, part of China, people want to go to China, people want to look up to China and view it as kind of a global leader. Now, as you said, these viewpoints don't necessarily represent, mainstream Chinese thought. And if you look in Chinese social media, a lot of the reaction against this sohu.com article was overtly negative. A lot of Chinese netizens got up and said, "We don't believe that you're..." However, there is this kind of nationalistic element that kind of views kind of history in kind of an odd way. I mean, the section of sohu.com that this article appeared on was a subsection. I believe it was a self-published section that didn't really have much editorial review, called Revealing the Truth Behind History. And they just, ran through a lot of articles about how Kazakhstan wants to be part of China, how Mongolia wants to be part of China, how the people of Vietnam want to be part of China, and a lot of what I would call kind of dubious claims based on kind of a cursory, very, very superficial review of history. These claims aren't really meant to be taken seriously. However, there is that undercurrent of thought that, hey, China occupied a portion of Kazakhstan at one time, and maybe they could make a territorial claim against Kazakhstan in the future, like they have done with kind of other places.
Well, the article has caused public fury and outcry here in Kazakhstan, especially because Kazakhstan actually strives to have good relations with China. China is one of its major investors and trade partners. Kazakhstan benefits significantly from the goods carried across its territory from China to Western Europe, which is why the country's leadership has embraced the Belt and Road initiative. Now, you've traveled extensively in Kazakhstan and China. How would you describe the relations between the two countries?
China and Kazakhstan are pretty close. I mean, first of all, they're neighboring countries. They share a pretty long border together, and they've also been engaging in kind of these mutually beneficial international projects. First of all, China has their Belt and Road initiative. Kazakhstan has this Joly initiative. They're basically the same thing. They're about kind of developing new transportation routes, developing new infrastructure, and building new manufacturing zones and different economic sectors all through Central Asia. And this is especially important for Kazakhstan because Kazakhstan, even still today, is heavily dependent on natural resources, namely oil and gas. And as we see right now with the price of oil plunging, that's not a very secure footing for the future. So in 2014, Nazarbayev announced the Joly initiative to kind of diversify Kazakhstan's economy. And you can't have Joly in Kazakhstan without China, because China is probably the biggest funder of such projects in the world, in the planet. I mean, Kazakhstan is not going to be able to get the kind of money that China is willing to invest in the country from anywhere else. It's not going to come from Russia, it's not going to come from the United States, it's not going to come from the EU, right? So Kazakhstan doesn't really have any other choice but to have close economic ties with China. And as of right now, China's invested in something like 55 projects in Kazakhstan, 55 major projects worth like $27 billion. Well, half of those are in oil and gas, the other half are in other sectors like transportation and like manufacturing. And in these sectors that Kazakhstan right now is trying really hard to develop.
China's development is really shaping the 21st century, and its emergence as a superpower is affecting the global political landscape. How do you think its development will shape the future of the region and countries like Kazakhstan, which are neighboring countries to China, and how will it affect the geopolitics of the region?
That's a really big question. That's probably is the question of our era. Economically speaking, you know, the direction that China is going with their Belt and Road initiative and their other international endeavors is pretty much the same direction that many other countries, especially emerging markets from Europe to Asia, are going in as well. So we have this kind of, it's kind of like, you know, the two rivers kind of like join in together, right? China and pretty much the rest of the Eurasian landmass are on the same page. However, if this was only about economics, then we could say, hey, this is a win-win for everybody. We want these new transport zones, we want these new roads, we want these new highways. China wants them too. We want, you know, to transport goods through our country because we make money from this. We want to manufacture goods. Oh, China wants these goods. China wants these transportation routes. So if it was only about economics, we'd say, oh yeah, this is, this is pretty, like Xi Jinping says, a rising tide lifts all ships, right? All these win-win partnerships. However, there's also a political element to the Belt and Road as well. And China has their ways that they want things done. They have their way system of politics. They have their way of foreign policy. And that often is very incongruent with the ways of a lot of other countries, namely Europe or namely the post-Soviet states. And there's a lot of conflict based around how these systems don't really match each other. And China hasn't been very good at kind of adapting their politics and their culture to kind of fit that of other countries. They're kind of taking more of a policy of, conditioning, countries to the Chinese way. And it hasn't always been very pretty.
Now, speaking of the economic relations between the two countries, you've been to the Khorgos Special Economic Zone at the border between China and Kazakhstan. You've seen the gigantic dry port. You've done a great documentary about it. How do you recall of it?
I recall there being a lot of hope, a lot of ambition out in the Khorgos region. Khorgos is at a prime position for this, right at the border of China and Kazakhstan. And China is kind of viewing kind of their western borderlands, almost as like a west coast, right? You know how like the east of China has kind of built up a lot of seaports and kind of transport-oriented development. Well, they're doing the same thing in the west coast, from Kashgar all the way up to Horgos, and even if you go up north around the country up to the northeast in Mongolia as well. And they've invested heavily into new city development and new transportation, new manufacturing projects in these kind of border regions. Now, at first, if you look at the economics, you say this doesn't make economic sense because there's not really many people out there. So how you build a manufacturing hub out in a region where there's not really any people? And China's like, well, we have ways of doing things like that, and we know how to incentivize people to move to places. We move their companies that they work for there because we own them, right? We move in universities, we move in schools, we move in hospitals. So China has ways to kind of create new cities from scratch. And if you look at the China side of the Horgos region, I mean, I'm not even talking about the International Center of Boundary Cooperation Duty-Free Zone, but the actual city of Horgos. They built an entirely new city there, within the span of 5 years.
Now, there seems to be enough of economic cooperation between the two countries, but I don't see so much. Well, having lived most of my life in Kazakhstan and from here living in Nur-Sultan, I don't see so much of social exchange between the two countries. We don't see so many of the, human stories of friendships. We don't see so much of cultural, academic exchange. China has advanced tremendously in arts, science, in film, in music industries. How do you think the countries could benefit from actually boosting the social exchanges?
I mean, we have this new generation in kind of both, China and Kazakhstan that I would just call internationalized, right? They're very cued in with the world outside, right? And they're almost more of these kind of global citizens than they are, of the traditional cultures from which they come. And, I mean, it's like young people who grew up in cities in China are kind of consuming similar media and doing similar things and have similar interests as young people who grew up in cities. And in Kazakhstan, same thing. It's young people who grow up in cities in the United States. So just kind of naturally, kind of the cultures or the new generations of these cultures are kind of moving in the same direction more and more as the years go on. But as far as more concrete activities to kind of build these person-to-person networks and person-to-person relationships, I would say, both countries are investing heavily in education, investing heavily in industry, and there's gonna have to come a point where both countries kind of push things past their comfort zones, right? I mean, Kazakhstan is really sensitive about, Chinese people moving into Kazakhstan. It's warranted because, Kazakhstan has less people than the city of Shanghai, right? China has one of the biggest resources, the most powerful resources that China has is people. And as we've seen with Xinjiang, it's very easy not easy, but it's very possible, for China to kind of give incentives for people to move to certain areas, and then all of a sudden there's massive amounts of Chinese people moving in. However, in order for these kind of transport-oriented and more industrial projects in Kazakhstan to really work, the country needs more people, right? So, both kind of countries have to kind of push past their comfort zones and kind of figure out a way to kind of compromise, kind of move into the future together.
Kazakhstan is indeed very sensitive to China's expansion, especially amid mass reports on human rights violations against the Muslim minorities in the Xinjiang province. We get reports on mass detention and surveillance on the Uyghurs, Kazakhs, and other Muslim minorities living in Western China. Have you been to any of the re-education camps in China? Have you seen any of the victims of the alleged repressions? And what is the general outlook and the view of the general public in China on what's going on in Xinjiang?
This is what I'm going to say. Pretty bluntly, the BeltandRoad has no future in Kazakhstan as long as these camps exist, right? Uyghurs are a pretty large ethnic minority in Kazakhstan, and China's also putting ethnic Kazakhs in these camps. That is confirmed. It's a fact. It exists. There's people in Kazakhstan who has family who mysteriously disappear in China. There's Kazakhs who have gotten out of these camps who have came back to Kazakhstan and told their stories of what happened. So China seems to think that they can kind of keep, internal issues siloed and nobody else in the world is going to care about them, right? So they say, Xinjiang and our counterterrorism initiative in Xinjiang, this is a Chinese issue and it has nothing to do with Kazakhstan. wrong. It does have something to do with Kazakhstan because, first of all, this area is like right on your border. Secondly, because ethnic Kazakhs, people in Kazakhstan can like ethnically relate to, and oftentimes it's like physically related to, are being kind of put in these camps. So like all this stuff about people-to-people exchanges and kind of moving into the future together, I don't see a way that this can move forward as long as these camps and as long as this counterterrorism initiative in Xinjiang is in operation.
The reasons for these detentions seem to be merely linguistic, cultural, religious differences.
It's kind of hard to say like what the actual reasons is behind these detentions because there's a lot of innocent people who are being put into these camps. And basically kind of the triggers that China's kind of looking at to determine, whether or not someone should be put into these camps is often, religion. Do you practice Islam? Did you, say the word Allah? Did you, it's oftentimes very, very superficial, the reasons by which China is selecting people to go into these camps. So yeah, I mean, some could say that it's culture side. It's, recondition a population to kind of have that Chinese worldview. And they've taken huge steps into this program, so it's actually going to be really hard for them to kind of backtrack on all this. I mean, a lot of damage has been created from this program in Xinjiang, and it actually risks, a large part of the Belt and Road's ability to be successful in Muslim countries and especially in Kazakhstan.
Well, Wade, this has been very insightful.
Thank you very much. It was excellent talking with you.
Thank you so much. Thank you for joining today. I hope we meet again in person and in better times.
Yeah, we're all in this together.
Thank you, Wade.